Well, howdy. Here we are again. I'm saying howdy because we just finished talking about the West. And now we're going to talk about New England. So on this map here, it says United States is. Remember that is versus are. But you want to think about the United States really as three separate regions. You've got the New England region, which is basically up to here. You most of the time consider sort of New York State part of it. Pennsylvania is one of those that kind of falls into a mid-Atlantic area, but more often than not, you'd associate it more closely with aligned with New England. The West is pretty much everything out here once you get on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains. Um, and the South is going to be from kind of Maryland down, but kind of not into this lower area here. If I would get this to turn a little bit. Oh, well, get the other one turn. There we go. Might turn that guy a little bit down here, sort of more into this kind of region a little bit. There we go. That's more I consider the South. And the West is kind of this everything else. So I don't know what the heck that did, but whether that tells you anything. But generally, that's what we're talking about. This is the South, is Virginia around the coast down through this area. You could go as far up as maybe Kentucky, Virginia, and this region right through here. So maybe it would just do better if I got rid of those things here. So let me just get rid of those bad boys here and get rid of that. Boop. All right. So when we talk about these regions, oops, here we go. I'm going to try to put them all together. My mouse, I forgot my mouse at school, so it's not working. Anyway, well, you get the idea. Oh, wait, we're going backwards. Now you're not. Okay. Let's start over. It's now a minute and a half, and I haven't done anything. All right, so here we are. So here's New England up here. You've got the West out here, and you got the South down here. Think of it really in three regions. And we're talking about the South in class. I just did a little, 15-minute vignette thing on the West. And now I want to talk about New England because New England we've already talked about before. New England we've probably spent the most time on because of the early settlers and that. But you have to understand from the very beginning, it has not been an area where large-scale commercial farming was ever going to be possible. It doesn't have the climate for it. It doesn't have the geography for it. What happens is you have people making a living by either trade, by some kind of shipping-related industry, shipbuilding, or possibly the industries that are starting to emerge here, early 1800s. We have a shifting population where much of the population early on is rural, but we're going to see that becoming much more urban as we move into the phase we're talking about. Well, when you move into the urban population, what happens is there's going to be a shift because suddenly you don't even have people raising subsistent level of farming. Plus, you also have a market for goods that because of the proximity, because you're still fairly close, the farms are right next to the big cities, you can turn your farms into dairy farms and you can sell milk, you can sell cheese, and that's going to be because these are products that are perishable, even the meats. So if you had to travel any distance at all, we don't have refrigerated cars yet. You can't ship meats more than a state or two. So what's going to happen is you're going to have people working in the factories, but there'll become this industry that literally grows up in New England around providing the needs of people who work in the factories with perishable goods. So we've got a new sort of thing growing. Now, the industrial economy of the North is going to emerge primarily for geographic reasons. If you look at this map over here, you see all these little red or these little blue lines here? Those are all the streams and rivers that flow into the ocean from here. Now, when we talked about the mid-Atlantic, you recall we did the tidal basin. So we're talking about that slow coastal plain or that low coastal plain that kind of went out and then right into the ocean. That is not the case in New England. If you look at New England, you've got an instant, it's going to immediately go up. So you've got the land that goes right up to the shore, but it moves up. So the water is going to flow down into the ocean. That's why we're not ever going to have any kind of tidewater issues here. We're not going to have any swamp water issues, no malaria, no mosquito, any of that. It simply does not exist in New England, in large part because of the geography. This is an area that is really rocky. It's not great. It's one of the things that made it not great for farming was it was rocky, but it also now makes it a pretty darn good place for setting up factories because what that water is going to provide us is a source of energy. And that river and the way that the rivers are going to be able to move here are going to be doing just that. If you look at this picture here is a perfect example. If I can get it to move here, if I can get it to grow. There we go. That's a perfect example of what we've got. You see right there, they're going to have little water wheels around there, and they're going to use these rivers to tune up energy. Over here, same kind of thing. You're going to have rivers that are going to be using energy and doing the same kind of thing. Okay, fast flowing rivers become these power sources for the rivers. Okay, a lot of the early people in New England were merchants and traders. They've made a lot of money. They've profited. So what's going to happen is they're going to end up putting a lot of money into as investors in these industrial projects. So here you've got sort of this idea 1700 to 1840. Now, this is sort of the economic growth that we've talking about. Remember, Hamilton was all about developing a banking system and getting that. If you look here, that is going to be what happens. Now, we're going to go down during the war. It's going to pop back up. You're going to see it go down again during the war, going to pop back up. And this is when the factories and railroads are going to get started. And a lot of that economic growth, the money to sort of finance that is going to come from these folks who made a tremendous amount of money during the period when there was shipbuilding and when they were supporting these industries, the commercial trade of New England. But the one thing we learned in the War of 1812 is that diversification of our industry was going to be a good idea. The other thing it's going to correlate with this time period was we still need workers in these cities. But unlike the South, which doesn't have a tremendous number of ports, big port cities, in the North, we're going to have a steady source of labor. Part of the reason why the South needs a labor force is they're not getting this immigrant group. Part of the reason why the North doesn't need slaves is they have cheap, free labor coming over in the way of immigrants. If you look here at immigration numbers, there's 1820. If you look at the numbers here right before the Civil War, we're going to peak at about 420,000 people coming in. That is unbelievable. Look at that spike in the 40s. Now, we'll talk about a lot of the people coming in at that time are going to be Irish and Germans, and they're going to be fleeing a very difficult situation in Europe. So if you look at the population growth, again, there's 1740, 1770, 1800, 1830. Just look at that doubling growth, at least double. That's almost triple by the time we get to that one. Immigration, 1820 to 1840, a steady increase of immigration. We will always be a mecca for people seeking economic opportunity and seeking to sort of make their mark on the world. This increasing workforce is great for the economy because it means that we're always going to have people in jobs. Population distribution and density. Look at this is at 1790. If you look at where our population was and how dense it was, it's really hugging the coast here. By the time you get to 1850, we have really populated this area out here. I mean, Ohio doesn't even exist in 1790, and look how densely populated it is here. I mean, it's crazy. And yet, if you compare that with the South, you don't have that density in population. You don't have the urban areas. You don't have the economic opportunities. You have a number of slaves, but you don't move there for that. You move for jobs and things that come with that. Cities. We looked at one of these maps today in class, but I want to make sure you're checking it out here. Here's cities in 1820. You know, you have a few cities up north. Charleston appears, New Orleans appears. By the time you get down here, you've still got New Orleans and Montgomery and Charleston. Beyond that, Louisville is like the closest thing you can get, maybe Richmond. Other than that, there literally aren't cities down there. It's because they are so focused on their cottonocracy and developing that sort of a economic product and engine that they're not going to expand. They're going to keep everything sort of isolated onto their plantations, and they're not going to be bringing in large numbers of people. Manufacturing employees. If you look here, 1820, these are people involved in manufacturing. You know, very few rather are out here. It's all concentrated here. That's not really going to be that significant a change. Yes, you're going to see some manufacturing out here, but it's not going to be these darker colors that you see. And look at the colors here when you get up into Massachusetts and Long Island. That's heavy duty. Changing occupations. 78% of us in 1820 were involved in agriculture. That's going to drop to 52% that's going to be by 1860. If you look at the other areas that pick up, manufacturing goes from 2 to 13. So with this, we're also going to see a shift towards more specialization of labor, where people are going to start developing skills that are needed for this kind of industrial economy. In the north, you've got these industrial towns developing around a mill. If you look here, all of these industries typically follow along rivers. They're almost all built up along those rivers. Again, that source of energy. Here you've got the shaft, and these are the water wheels. So the water flows in here, and it turns the water wheels, which in turn turns these little turbines here, which turns these, which in turn runs all the looms and runs the different machines in here. That's how you power these factories. Okay, so they build themselves around mills and factories. Whole communities will emerge. But it wasn't just the men of the house. This is the whole family involved here. In fact, mill towns will be known for the number of women working. Here's operation of spindles. We looked at spindles on the last slide. These are where operations of spindles are by 1840. And if you look at that, Massachusetts is massively involved. So they're going to take the cotton that they're growing in the South, and up north, they're going to be turning it into fabric. So that's it, okay? You've got these dots here. These largest circle represents 3,000 employees. So you've got tons of people sort of really concentrated in these areas. Okay, Lowell, Massachusetts becomes a very famous city during this time for workers who are involved in the fabric making and textile industry. They called it a city of spindles. Now, what Lowell did, which was kind of unique and ingenious, is the sons stayed home and worked with their dads on the farm. They're out there working on the farms, doing that, but it wasn't women's work. Women would do most of the inside work, right? Well, the problem was you end up with a lot of girls. If you have several daughters or girls around the house, there's not that much to do sometimes. Well, Lowell provided an opportunity for you to send your young women anywhere from 15 to 35, 8,000. Average stay is 4 years in this place. You work from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day. It's a 73-hour work week, 6 days a week, and you get a whopping $2.50. And by the way, if you're a young woman who receives that, you don't get that money. That money's sent home to your parents. I mean, it's crazy. What they did was they basically farmed out their labor and got these girls out there and out working and doing these things for them. And so what's going to happen is you've got a tremendous industry that emerges out of this fabric and textile there in New England. Additionally, if we sort of expand here a little bit, the population centers, this gives you a sense of where the early cities are. They're almost all located along rivers, or what we'll call navigable waterways. Transportation hubs are going to be really important. Most overland westward routes are going to be by horse, because a lot of these states, the landlocked states, don't have access to the river. And if they do, you're only going to end up in New Orleans. So what's going to happen is we're going to have to figure out a way to get transportation to these inland routes. You could pack it in, you can take it in by that, but generally speaking, you've got to develop other methods of getting them. That's why if you look at this map, what do you see there? The emergence of canals, roads, those are the ones in red, navigable rivers. Okay, so for the 1840s is really known as the canal age. It's the age when you can send a few, maybe even a couple of bushels of grain or 10 bushels of grain, but you can't carry that much on a horse. It's just limited. You have a barge going down river. That's great. You can use that. But the problem is you end up in New Orleans. So that's where those canals were, where you could pile things up on those barges and sail them all the way. And for those of you who missed this on the test, the big city you're going to get to across this first one is Albany, New York. With extra credit for some of you. Anyway, so we've got this sort of new need to sort of develop this new type of transportation. But this is when the government steps in. And this is part of what the North wanted with the American system, was to encourage innovation, to encourage patents, to encourage inventions. So what's going to happen is you're going to see the North being really excited about infrastructure. Think about the infrastructure. Ooh, just gets you so excited. Transportation, roads, canals, new markets, everything's exciting, right? This is all part of it. If you look at the number of patents here, look at that. Patents are what you do to make sure that you get credit for what you develop, your device. jump a little bit in the 1830s, 1840s. Look at those patents in 1850. We are just innovating our heads off. Here you've got the steamboat, the Clermont. Now we can navigate upstream. Before you could only sail stuff downstream. Now the steamboat allows us the ability to navigate both directions along rivers. That's an unbelievable thing. The canal system. Well, this is how canals work. Canals are basically man-made rivers. They would have, sometimes they would have the little path along here called the tow path, literally for a horse and rider to tow the goods, because that which you can't carry yourself, you can tow along water fairly easily. Hey, that's it. Any of you go bike riding out west, a lot of times you end up riding along the tow paths. But it's also important to understand that we developed our first locks during this time. So the way that locks work is, here, say the ship is, see where the ship down here is? So you move it into this area, you open up this gate, you move the ship into here. You lock this gate, open this gate. Then all the water floods into here. And what happens to the two levels of water? They even out. Then once they even out, you close that lock, you open that lock. I guess it's already been opened. Once the water level's the same, you sail on out, and that's your lock. You go right through. And that's how we did it when we were going up and down elevation in the United States. So we're going to use this process. If you look at some of these pictures, they show you just how elaborate some of these lock systems get. I mean, look at this one. This is a lock system that's going to raise it. You're going to go in there and you're going to go up two different locks before you get to the different level of the canal. Down here, there's the tow path, able to sort of animals to tow you along. So these are some pretty cool devices. Here's another one I'm going to use here just to give you another sense of what it looks like. Oops. Just take a look at this one. Look at that. That's a ship going up and down a lock system. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 locks in that. But you're probably traveling, several hundred feet in terms of where the land is and where you're able to move and what you're able to get around. So that's a pretty unbelievable invention. If you look at this, it shows you the amount of increase in infrastructure. If you look, downstream river rates are going to go down real low. And this is in terms of rates. You're going to see the cost of upstream river rates go down. Everything is going down. Canal rates are going down. Wagon rates. Why? Because there's competition. In a market economy like we have, prices are set by competition. And if you look here, all these different routes that we develop are competing with one another. So that's what's going to bring prices down. Just to give you a sense of how this is going to affect day-to-day travel, here's New York City. I don't know if you can see it here, but this one day, see it's all brown in there? That's 1 day travel. Then the next line around that is 2 days travel, then 3 days travel, and then 4 days travel, and 5 days, and 6 days. So you can see that you're not going to get very far. In a week, maybe you might make it to, Western New York or Western Pennsylvania, but that's going to be a full week. This is what it is by 1830 with the addition and advancement of all this. 1 day, you're pretty much all over here. A week, now you're suddenly all the way out into the Ohio River Valley, all the way through upstate New York, all the way through Pennsylvania. Now, you're still going to be several weeks before you can get out to the Great Lakes, but that's all coming in response to, or as a result of, the roads we're building, the canals we're making, things like that. Now, this is one more story about Eli Whitney. Happens about, the same time. It's actually going to be a little bit earlier, but he developed what's called the American System of Manufacturers. He is the pioneer in the United States of what we call interchangeable parts. Now, interchangeable parts is the idea that if I have a toaster and my toaster breaks, I can easily go down and find a piece to fix my toaster and just fix it. Or my wagon, like we were on the Oregon Trail, your wagon, your wheel breaks, you don't have to buy a new wagon, you just get a new wheel. That's what we mean by interchangeable parts. And the first thing he does it with, large scale here, is firearms. Look at that. Every piece you could replace, no matter what part of the firearm broke, you're able to replace it. Now, part of this means this is also in the factories going to encourage us to have public education, because to be able to put this together, you have to have some level of understanding and education to be able to read, to be able to follow directions and that. It requires a higher level of basic education than you saw required in the South. It also gives workers more versatility and adaptability. So suddenly we've got a little difference, because public education, something that comes from New England, is going to become this norm and the standard here in this in this region of the country. It leads to major economic expansion. We're going to be, by the time we get to the 1850s, the second leading industrial producer in the world, primarily agricultural products and raw materials. Now, we didn't make the raw materials, but we are certainly going to exploit them. Okay, 4 leading industries that we will have: cotton textiles, lumber, boots and flour milling. Okay, these are going to revolutionize the Southern economy. If you look at industrial expansion, in 1840, we've got $500 million worth of expansion. By 1850, we're going to be $1 billion. By 1860, one decade later, $2 billion. Okay, the factory is what is going to make New England unstoppable as an economic force. 140,000 factories in New England in 1860, 1.3 million factory workers. Okay, 900,000 of whom are in the North. Okay, and all of this based on wage labor, not slave labor, wage labor, taking advantage of the immigrants coming in and paying them a fair wage, which means it's going to incentivize people to come from other countries, and it's going to start bringing in large numbers of people, all ambitious, all ready to do their part and make their mark. Okay, we've got this. If you look at this chart here, by 1860, extensive manufacturing ability. That's why when you look up north, you're going to have the North, as we enter the Civil War in 1860, with some huge tangible advantages. Most of which are going to be a result directly of this manufacturing economy that they have developed. Okay, transportation, another huge area. And again, if you look at this map, where do you see most of the railroads? Are they north, south, or are they east, west? Well, I would hope we could all agree that it's mostly an east-west kind of thing. They are going to allow, and if you look, it's not going east-west down here from Charleston over to St. Louis. It's literally New York, all through the state of New York, up around Boston, and then connecting us to Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. That's going to be because they're going to start developing products out there that we want to ship back. Okay, it ties the east and west together is the railroad. The north is much more connected, much better options, much better communication, much better economic advantages, directly a result of the railroads. By the time the canal era is basically ready to start and ready to start producing, railroads are going to surpass them. So it's kind of like we put all this money and investment into canals and they never really achieve what we had hoped, because the railroad comes along and bypasses them. Mostly because it's so much easier to develop, and you don't have to dig the big ditches. Again, diverse economy based on industry and agriculture, large cities undergoing rapid urbanization, massive immigration, all kinds of spending on internal improvements, the Midwest and the Northeast linked, and then that economy based on free labor. And there you have it. That's New England. 23 minutes. Done.